In Hypixel Skyblock, there are over 60 weapons. Most of these are swords. Actually, all of these are swords if you read their description, even the mage weapons. And today, I feel like ranking every single one of them. Of course, it isn't fair to compare a Hyperion to a Bonsal Staff because they are from completely different price points and progression points in the game. So instead, I'll be rating these swords fairly based on their position in the game's progression. Speaking about progression, one of the best ways to progress in life is to become an under 93,339 subscribers gang by subscribing right now. Why would you do that? Because you're cool and I know it. Why such a precise number? Because haha random equals funny. To save you guys from boredom though, I'm going to rank a bunch of the swords that aren't anything special and just put these on the tier list so we can get into actually interesting swords. These are the AOTJ F, Fancy Sword F, Spider Sword F, End Sword F, Cleaver F, Flaming Sword C, Prismarine Blade F, Hunting Knife but only because it's a free sword C, Revenant Falchion F, Silver Fang B, Shaman Sword F, Ritual's Fang F, Edible Mace F, Leaping Sword F, Silk Edge Sword F, Reaper Scythe F, and every single sword a dungeon enemy can drop F. Actually, scratch that completely. They don't deserve to be on this tier list. Off to the void you go. Now that the utter trash is dealt with, I'll start with the interesting swords, starting with the regular swords because that's the order the Hypixel Skyblock wiki has them in. The first interesting weapon is the Undead Sword. It's not amazing, but you get this right at the start of the game for basically free, and it's the sword that you'll keep with you until you save up for something better. You aren't gonna keep it for long, but it's going to get you the combat 12 you need to get to the end, and it's going to keep you safe in the deep caverns. Easy A tier. The Tartition Sword is way too hard for an early game player to max out, and the Wooden Singularity costs more than the other swords below its own price range. Kind of a useless sword and goes into the F tier. Remember when the Ember Rod was the best weapon in the game? Keyword remember, because this sword has no place in the meta and the ability takes way too long to recharge. F. If you played Skyblock, you probably owned an aspect of the dragons at some point. Unfortunately, times have changed and it's no longer the best value for money, but it's still a very good transitional weapon for its price. A tier. The Frozen Scythe is a very good early game magic weapon and it can take you very far in dungeons, as well as being useful for grinding slayers. It's a solid A tier weapon, but there's newer things that outclass it. B. Golem Sword F. The Raider's Axe is the weapon that bridges players from very early game to the beginning of the mid game. It's affordable and its ability is nice for coins too. I'd give this an S rank if it didn't take a huge amount of wood to completely max out. A tier. The Aspect of the End is such a good weapon, not for its damage is awful, but the ability. Everyone who can afford one of these has one of these, and it has a permanent place on everybody's hotbars for a good reason. Easy A tier, it's not S because of its lack of damage. The 3 Slayer swords are all okay, but none of them are particularly useful anymore. Only the Reaper Falchion can see some use by late game players, so it deserves B tier. The Scorpion Foil is efficient but too limited in use and is C tier, and the Pooch Sword is just F tier. Similarly, the 3 zombie swords are just really good healing sticks, so they all go into the B tier. The Endstone Sword has very limited uses, like in Diana's event for example, but I feel like that doesn't mean it's a good or a useful sword. It's very situational, so I guess it will be barely sitting in the C tier. The Inkwand's ability can be useful for one-hitting things, and really that's all it's good for. I'm feeling generous today, so I'll put this in C tier. Now the Emerald Blade has gone under the radar in recent months, but it's still a force to be reckoned with. It outclasses the Giant Sword if you have around 500 million in your purse, which a lot of players do, and all the money after that adds to it. Slap one for all on an Emerald Blade, and this baby will hurt more than a domestic abuse case. It's a S tier weapon, simply because you do not have to spend anything to get a super strong sword, and your coins are still coins you can spend on anything new that comes out. There's no commitment and no strings attached. The Midas Staff is a super expensive investment, but it's also super worth it. You can use this weapon for literally every floor of dungeons, converted or not, and it does good area damage outside of dungeons too. Way too strong and carries a worthy price tag too. Also S tier. The Midas Sword, bigger brother of the Midas Staff, is still one of the best weapons in the game. It's outclassed by other things, but it's dropped to the point where you can get a matched one for pretty cheap, and as a weapon, a Gilded Midas is still basically one of the best weapons in the game. Only A tier for me because there are cheaper equivalents. Yeti Sword is just a budget Midas Staff on the inside. Nice range, but heavily outclassed. B. Sword of Revelations is an event sword that does event things and you don't need to buy it, but you can buy it if you want. B. Remember when the Pigman Sword was relevant? Those were the times, man. Pigman Sword goes brrrr. A warped aspect of the end is just an amazing weapon. For its price, it literally beats a Midas and just falls short of a Gilded Midas for 10 times less than the price. Paired with strong dragon armor, there's nothing the sword can't do. Even endgame players can get some use out of this sword if money is an issue. It's a solid S tier for me, but Gilded Midas swords are being sold off for almost the price of their enchants now, and it might be worth buying someone's used Midas instead. Jerry Sheen Gun, as big of a joke it is, has its use in skipping the first Necron phase even faster than before, as well as doing decent damage for its price. A. All the special cleavers, C, are kinda bad, except the Hyper Cleaver, B, because you need it for floor 4. Bonsal Staff is a mage weapon. It's alright for its time, but there are newer things like the expensive Midas Staff or the Jerry Sheen Gun that are better in raw damage, attack speed, and mana drain. B. Adaptive Blade has a very short window of use, but that's more than can be said about some other items on this list. C. Spirit Sword is just a raw damage sword that's so boring, but at least it's good for the one whole floor it's good for. B. The Spirit Scepter though, shoots bats, blinds people, make you look cool, it just works perfectly. A. The Ice Spray used to be this must-have weapon that everyone wanted for its high damage, and nowadays, it's just used to hold enough tough enemies in place so you can hit them with a Bone Meringue, or to deal 10% extra damage to Necron. B. Livid's Dagger is the perfect example of everything wrong with Dungeon's balancing, but that's because it's way too good for its cheap price. There's a lot of endgame players using the sword as their main sword because the attack speed and backstabs are so strong. Easy S tier sword, but it could also be very easily outclassed in a near update. Shadow Fury is really fun to use except for when Skeleton Masters are around, and it is really good inside dungeons, especially with the speed on it. But outside of dungeons, it's really outclassed and Berserkering is a dead art unfortunately. B. Necromancer's Sword is just Spirit Sword 2.0, except this time it's not even good for stats. C. The Flower of Truth. Fine, I admit it, it's good. If you have the right setup, then it's a great weapon for clearing rooms or getting a quick lifesteal in at range. But if you have high defense and low damage, the sword, flower, is good as useless. A. Giant Sword though? A giant sword with one for all makes for an insane budget weapon for late game players and is equivalent to that of a 500 million emerald blade with one for all. It's up to you if losing your enchants is a fair trade-off for all the damage this can output. A. Finally, the 5 Necron Blades. The raw Necron Blade is useless, but nobody uses it anyway because it's more of a crafting material. Astrea would make a great tank sword if tanks were relevant. F. The Styla is the best bow in the game. Wait, it's not a bow? They made an archer sword? What? F. The Valkyrie is the best melee weapon in the game right now, and also carries a price tag that reflects that. S. The Hyperion is just a Valkyrie but without the ferocity. If you wanna use it outside of dungeons, you're gonna want the ferocity. Especially with the scrolls, these are the best weapons in the game. S. So there, every weapon in Skyblock ranked. Why did I do this? Because I felt like it. Do you disagree with me? Please feel free to cry about it in the comments. Alright, cool. See ya.